And for those of you who are not familiar with Marmite, it's a spread on your toast.
It's disgusting. It's disgusting.
Lovely. Wonderful.
Some
It's
people love
disgusting.
it,
Yeah.
some people hate it. So a brand has got to have that kind of like, it's got to have that emotional kick where somebody just goes, yeah, I totally love that. Or it's like, not a hope in heck, but you need to have that resonance to be the alienate or attract your ideal target audience, which means you've got to amp up that level of differentiation.
But then I realized, well, there's two entities. There's me, the person, and then there's the brand. And there is an overlap, but they are different. And that was a big penny drop for me where I went, oh, okay, so hold on. There was like a mental jujitsu moment where I had to go, okay, hang on, well, what's the brand? Well, what does that stand for? And what does the brand want to do? And what does the brand, how would look? And then as you guys would know, the brand can change over time. And you go, well, actually, what does it stand for now? Because what it stood for 6 years ago is now different, which is true in my case. So it's a kind of continuous evolution that I'm always looking at. Then, you know, when you're looking then as a leader, say if I'm dealing with the CEO and I'm asking, like, how do you want to be seen? How do you want to be represented, not just in terms of your personal brand, but how does that align then with the business brand and where's the difference? And then increasingly, a lot of CEOs will ask about thought leadership and how they present that in the digital world and even in interviews. And very often what I'll find is that they haven't really thought that through. It's a little bit ad hoc, and the differentiation, if done strategically, adds one thing that's hugely powerful in any career or company, which is perceived value. So like perceived value is incredible. That can be structured, that can be enhanced. I'm always looking at it. I'm always looking at ways to try and enhance my perceived value with a client or a potential client. And that can be done through storytelling as well.
Welcome to the Fractional Frontier, where we explore the future of leadership in today's evolving business landscape. I'm Lorraine Carter here with Charles McLachlan, and every week we dive deep into the world of high-performing fractional executives and businesses that leverage them.
And so we're delighted today to have Shane Cradock with us. And in particular, we recognize that whether you're an experienced fractional leader or a business decision maker seeking top-tier talent, this is the place to be for actionable insights, strategies, and stories from the front lines of fractional leadership.
And today we're exploring a critical topic for fractional executives and buyers of that expertise: how to build a strong personal brand and reputation to attract and serve not only your primary target audience, whether you are a business leader or whether you're a fractional executive. And Shane is who works with high-performing leadership consultants, as a leadership consultant and CEO advisor, is with us today to share his insights and perspective as somebody who works at a really strong international leadership level. So Shane, you're very welcome. Can you start by telling us a bit about your journey and what led you into this space?
Okay, well, thanks for having me on your show, Lorraine and Charles. It's good to be here. It's scary to say this out loud, but I guess I'm kind of working in a version of this space for just over 25 years. So I suppose my business has evolved in many ways, probably adapting to the times, also potentially to the opportunities that technology has given, and probably my own experience of, you know, keeping looking for where I find the most excitement, interest, and maybe the most value I can give. So I got into this unexpectedly in a way, because originally I graduated from university in Dublin, University College Dublin, with a degree in biochemical engineering. So as I like to joke, I was learning how to make beer bombs and drugs. So dangerous combination for an Irish person. But anyway, that doesn't seem to be in the stars for me, because I was working for a big multinational, looking up to get a good job out of college. But early on in that, there was a personal change in my life insofar as I managed to get myself into a very severe spiral of depression, which culminated in suicidal ideation. I don't say that lightly because it was a very serious, dark time for me. But obviously, luckily and fortunately, through one specific intervention of somebody being in the right place at the right time to stop me doing something I couldn't take back, I was given an opportunity to come out of my insanity for a moment and realize, this is dangerous. And I was given the opportunity to make a decision which the decision was, are you going to live or are you going to go? And I clearly made the decision to live. It wasn't easy. But that started me on the route of, first of all, survival, because I realized I had let my mind get into a very dangerous place, which had decided to try and essentially, like an assassin, take me out. And I worked to reverse that. But as I did that, what I realized was there was this whole world, almost what I'm going to call the inner world, that nobody had ever told me about. And areas connected to that would be things like personal development, performance psychology, achievement psychology, mindfulness, meditation. But in particular, after I kind of got past survival, I went, oh, I wonder, could I use some of these principles to achieve more? And that's what I started to explore. And I realized there was a whole other world around that. And I managed to kind of learn how to get better at my job, get better at my health, do better myself. And in time, I decided to leave the corporate world. And I hadn't decided that I was going to use some of that material yet in the way I do it now. I really kind of stepped out initially and say, okay, it wasn't really a thing. When I left the corporate world, even coaching wasn't really an established industry. It was kind of makey uppy, BS sounding kind of territory, especially if you were an Irish person, as I found out. So I kind of went into the traditional business consultant kind of mode or role. And I started there, which was hard at the time, but essentially I was taking what I learned in the multinational sector and said, okay, I'm going to try and share this and package this with the entrepreneurial SME sector. And that took a while, but eventually it worked. And I ended up getting a good series of clients. But as I was going along, I realized in my own development on the inner side, I realized, oh, some of this stuff is relevant to these business owners, CEOs, and senior executives because they're all stressed. But every time, at the time, it was, early 2000s, mostly men I was dealing with, actually. Anytime I brought up the mental side of business, I just would kind of get pushed gently to the side, say, no, we don't need to talk about that. That's not really what we talk about. We're here about making money. I'm like, yeah, no, but this is going to help you make money. We don't really talk about that. At the same time, there was an interesting trend going on, which was sports was embracing sports psychology in the early noughties. And that has obviously since grown into mainstream area. So that was happening at the same time. So it was slowly opening people's minds. Then there was a massive crash in 2008 and 9. And this is where my opportunity came because the level of stress in the system got hugely amplified. And pretty much every single one of my clients came to me and said, that kind of weird mental stuff you wanted to talk about before. Yeah, can we talk about that now? Because would that help me de-stress? Would that help me manage myself? And that was the opportunity for what became really the next 10 years of case studies to move more in that direction. And so what happened in that time was I got a chance to test my own theories. I got a chance to test research. I got a chance to learn. I got a chance to experiment. And I got some really powerful experiences and results with clients and also myself, I might add. But it didn't mean that there weren't challenges along the way. There were huge ones. There was tests of resilience, but all of it added up to another repositioning then around about 2019, where I started to move more into saying that I am specifically positioning with CEOs and founders, business owners around the inner game of leadership and life. And so the pandemic then wasn't caused by me, but it certainly helped my business again, because that was another opportunity. Because in that moment, again, there was an explosion, not just of uncertainty and with its stress, but also there was an explosion in idea sharing. And the idea sharing, because of the connectedness of the world now, something interesting has happened during that time and has continued since, where there's an explosion of interest in things like neuroscience, mindfulness, well-being. But still, there's a long way to go. So I don't know if I'm answering exactly your question, but that's kind of that's the long answer of kind of how I've ended up here working primarily as, I guess, I sometimes I struggle to, I never really use the word coach because I think coaching has become commoditized. And actually, I know from working with other coaches that I don't do what a lot of them do. I kind of look at myself as a partner or a champion for a CEO, somebody who's independent and who's allowed to sit with them, man or woman, and have their back, have no agenda other than their success and their happiness, but also to be the one person perhaps who's going to give it to them straight between the eyes. And I suppose I feel that I have enough experience now that maybe I'm more comfortable in doing that. Maybe earlier in my career, I was maybe a little bit more insecure about it, but now I pretty much could, I would say anything to any one of my clients because I think they know that I'm there for their success. And I suppose the other thing I'd add in is just the nature maybe of the kind of industries that I've worked with. At this stage, I was doing a count there recently. It's over 60 industries I worked with, I think. Um, at the moment, my profile of clients would be, I would say 70% entrepreneurial, founder, SME, probably 25%, 30% would be maybe large enterprise corporate. And I would say it's almost 50-50 men and women, which I enjoy because particularly the last 10, 12 years, there's been a massive explosion of female leaders coming through. I think that's healthy for the overall ecosystem of the business world. But they also have specific challenges that some cases men don't. And that's been also an interesting learning curve for me to support a lot of women coming into what was previously a male dominated and at times still is. Yeah, so I've worked with a lot of big companies. Some I can name, some I can't. The ones I can name, I've worked with Apple, I've worked with Dell, Prada. There's a lot of companies in Ireland that I'd be working with in terms of like Aspire Technology, the Louis Copeland Group, Saba Restaurant Group, and then there's other clients like in London and sometimes occasionally in mainland Europe that I would work with as well.
Well, it's fascinating to hear your journey, and I suppose part of your success is the way that you have found mechanisms for building that reputation and being very clear about what you stand for. What do you see are the key sort of gotchas that CEOs and senior leaders have when you're talking to them about how to ensure that they're presenting themselves with something that's consistent and relevant to the role they've got? What are the branding issues that you see with those CEOs and leaders?
Okay, that's an interesting one. Look, I think the first thing I suppose that's relevant there to me with the CEO or senior leader is that they already have a brand, that they already have a personal brand. And so oftentimes I will, when I'm first getting to know a client, I'll ask, I mightn't use the word brand, but I might say, hey, how do you think you're perceived? What's your leadership style? What do you think it is? And they will give me, I might say, give me 3 words to describe your leadership style or how you think you come across to people. And usually they're not the words that actually other people would use. Because I go often and talk to the people around them and say, hey, give me 3 words to describe CEO or the leader. If it's a very aware leader, you might get a little bit of alignment, but it's very rarely ever exactly the same. And so I think that's the first thing is that they have an established personal brand already. You know, it's kind of like that phrase, like, what do people say about you when you leave the room? Like, what is the answer to that question? What do you think is the answer to that question? And very often it's not the answer that sometimes you want, because a lot of the behaviors that we have as leaders are unconscious. They're often blind spots. And even there's a lot of research around this where, you know, say, I think the most recent research I was looking at, which kind of backs up my own experience, is that, you know, I think there was 50,000 leaders asked to rate themselves in terms of whether they were an inspiring role model or not. And I think 86% said that they saw themselves as inspiring role models. But at the same time, there's also a survey done of employees, say, how many of you would rate your leaders as inspiring or non-inspiring? And pretty much, I think it was 85% said non-inspiring. So there's a massive gap between perception and reality. And then, you know, when you're looking then as a leader, say if I'm dealing with the CEO and I'm asking, well, like, how do you want to be seen? How do you want to be represented, not just in terms of your personal brand, but how does that align then with the business brand and where's the difference? And then increasingly, a lot of CEOs will ask about thought leadership, how they present that in the digital world and even in interviews. And very often what I'll find is that they haven't really thought that through. It's a little bit ad hoc. It's kind of done as something that they will figure out along the way. And so very often what I'll sometimes do is get them to just to consider it, look at it more closely. Very often, sometimes that means bringing in, for example, an experienced copywriter, for example, to write and learn how to write in the tone of the CEO to save them time. Because the one thing that all CEOs and senior leaders have in common in general is that they're time poor. And so they just look at things like writing and thought leadership. Oh, I haven't got the time yet. Actually, there's many ways to do that to really enhance their brand. And I think you guys will be more experts in this than me, but we are definitely living in a time now where, we've always had a personal brand, but it's amplified everywhere now.
Yeah.
It's never been more amplified. And it's just got to the point, I think, that you just can't ignore it. So that literally comes down to even the clothes you wear.
Yeah.
It's funny.
Who would you say is a great exemplar out there that's in the public domain that you think really has nailed it in terms of expressing a brand that is authentic and meaningful and aligned to what he's doing or she's doing?
I'm not sure I can name one on the spot. I mean, let's see, there's so many. Ooh, I don't know. Could you give me some ideas?
Well, I mean, organizations like Ryanair and EasyJet have got champions that sometimes are a bit of a Marmite, but
they're consistent with their branding.
Yeah.
I mean, Michael O'Leary, to me, would be still consistent with the brand of Ryanair. It's a representation of him, rough and ready, maverick.
Yeah.
What you see is what you get. I'm going to say things you don't like. I'm going to do things you don't like. I don't really care. Do you want what I offer or not? So I think he's consistent with his brand and how he operates. I can think of some of my clients that I think are good exemplars, but I don't know if I've got permission to say them. That's why I was hesitating.
Well, that's fair enough. I mean, everything you've actually shared, Shane, totally nails it. And certainly in my experience, and no doubt in Charles' experience as well, in terms of that big issue of alignment, in terms of, yes, all the work's gone into the business entity or the product entity brand, perhaps, or at least hopefully. And so often that leaders, not even at CEO level, but other leadership in the business, there are huge misalignments, or they just haven't put that reflective time into it or got feedback to get a sense of, rather than what that internal factor is that actually how I'm showing up? And sometimes it's even getting recognition of the fact that you actually have a personal brand, whether you realize it or not, or whether you've put work into it to consciously put alignment around that and to consciously, intentionally do certain things that's going to not only help your personal brand, but align more strongly with the business entity, because effectively the leaders, as well as the broader team in the business, are the voice of the brand.
Yeah,
and so that misalignment can be hugely damaging.
Absolutely. Look, actually, there's one I can say, actually. So one of my clients is a woman called MMA. She's CEO of a company called Ardale, and they own different businesses. One of the businesses they own is like a building provider called Core. But Emma would have been somebody who, and actually, sorry, she won the Image Businesswoman of the Year awards last year in Ireland, the overall award. So it was a significant award, very high profile. But before pretty much last year, 2024, she would have kind of deliberately stayed under the radar and kind of then made a conscious decision. Okay, I'm going to step out and kind of maybe embrace more of this more constructively, and would have through discussion say, okay, well, this is kind of the branding side that I'm now going to kind of basically amplify. And so that would have then led to things like interviews, which was part of the process. It also led to thinking about what articles am I going to write. And also importantly, and something that Lorraine, for example, would have asked me a few years ago, which I thought was great, like, what do you stand for? Like, what do you want to stand for? And what are the causes that you want to stand for? What's the impact you want to make? And so there were questions that she would have considered then. And she works as a woman, a female CEO in construction and property, which is like very rare at the moment, so it's a very male dominated industry. And so part of her one was to shake that up a little bit. This became kind of her higher purpose in terms of shaking it up, looking maybe to do things a different way. She's also very specific on the culture she wants to create in the building providers, which again is male dominated, but she's deliberately brought in more women. But all that's part as well of not just the business brand, but her brand. And it's still, I think, like, as you guys would know, it's still a little bit of, You make it up as you go along by what you learn and things like that. And what's interesting watching her is she's enjoying it. I think she's doing a good job. I think she's also probably become more conscious of what she wears when she shows up to something. And that's kind of the age that we're in. And she's now speaking at different events, and she has to kind of maybe be more conscious about what's the message that is in line with my personal brand and what I stand for, and also for the companies that I own, that we have that kind of alignment. And what's interesting is that already, even though we're kind of maybe just over a year into that change of focus for her, what's interesting is that you can kind of see this kind of flywheel effect of you can see a reinforcement and an amplification that's adding value to the business and to her perceived value as a leader. So that's what I'm finding interesting, just by being more conscious about that personal branding element.
And that would be very much something that I would articulate around with, because sometimes you get a bit of pushback, or less so now in recent years, because really you can't be a leader in any context without being conscious of the fact that you are everywhere and you can't hide under a rock any longer. And online is all pervasive, and the lines between the physical world and the online world are well and truly blurred at this stage. But there would have been a little bit, if you go back maybe over 10 years ago, there would have been more skepticism around this. And as you have experienced, Shane, a lot less so now. But the challenge then is actually understanding how you then actually manifest that and be far more strategic around it while still being authentic. So in your experience, if you're stepping back not only from your own experience, but maybe we're observing other executives or clients that you're working with, if you were summing up a few key components of a personal brand, what would you, if somebody who's just starting to look at this more strategically, perhaps, whether they're running a large organization and stepping out just as you've described, or whether they're perhaps even stepping into more of a portfolio executive role, what were some of those components that you would say that they should start addressing initially?
Okay. Well, I think going back to that question that I mentioned a few minutes ago about what do you stand for?
Yeah.
I think that's a good starting point.
Yeah.
Or what do you want to stand for? Now, within that, I think you have to bring in the word results.
Yeah.
So, if I'm looking at myself again, and if I was going back to advise myself, I'd say, okay, look, well, like, what do you want to stand for? Okay, well, I want to stand for getting results with clients.
Yeah.
I want to stand for impact. I also want to stand for having a bit of fun along the way. And I'd like to be a role model for what I'm talking about, because that's maybe the hardest thing in a position like mine, is you can talk about stuff, but not necessarily do it. So that comes back to results. So I think, look, for me on a very simple level, if you are good at what you do, then people will talk about that.
Yeah.
So on a very simple level, that's probably, for me, it was probably my starting point for anybody, because we live in a world where it is easy to maybe become a master of style and less so of substance. And I think and I think people are kind of getting, in a way, desensitized to that. I think we're at a point where, like, it's kind of that it's always going to be there. It's always going to be there as a temptation, but I think it's just kind of, okay, well, if we're a business, if I'm a CEO in a business, or if I'm a fractional executive, what's my reputation? What do I want my reputation to be?
Yeah.
And that comes down to, well, what am I trying to do? What am I trying to create? What do I want to stand for? What's my impact? And that is worth giving time and attention to, and then say, right, well, let me now deliver on that.
Yeah.
And that's the hard work, perhaps, is like deliver, follow through, and get it done. After that, I think then it's down to, okay, what else am I trying to do here? Am I trying to am I trying to reach people in a certain way? Am I trying to cause some kind of change? What's my overall purpose here? And so once I'm kind of clear about if there is a purpose, like, for example, I mentioned Emma, she has a bigger purpose around trying to influence probably the sector she's in, around maybe changing some of its practices, maybe having more women leaders. It's good. It's healthy. So that's probably a higher purpose for me. My impact isn't just about Shane Cradock Inc. and growing his business, my purpose is clear. Again, Lorraine, you would have helped me a little bit with that as well a few years ago, asking some questions, say like, well, and especially it's funny because I remember a conversation between you and I years ago where I think a penny drop happened for you where it's like, okay, like if I'm a solo person, I have a small team around me, but they're all virtual, part-time, fractional, I guess. So I'm a solo, but I always thought, well, I'm the brand. But then I realized, well, there's two entities. There's me, the person, and then there's the brand. And there is an overlap, but they are different.
Yeah.
And that was a big penny drop for me where I went, oh, okay, so hold on. There was like a mental jujitsu moment where I had to go, okay, hang on, well, what's the brand? Well, what does that stand for? And what does the brand want to do? And what does the brand, how it would look? And then, as you guys would know, the brand can change over time. And you go, well, actually, what does it stand for now? Because what it stood for 6 years ago is now different, which is true in my case. So it's a kind of continuous evolution that I'm always looking at. And so, but there is an outward part to that brand for me, which has led to thought leadership interest. So I'm looking to, I suppose, maybe affect people's minds in a certain way. I see us at a key point right now in time where the leadership model is ineffective, where it has to shift into a different mode. And I'm looking to try and generate, so I need to kind of look, well, how do I do that? So that even question led to, well, what technology do we have? Like, obviously we're talking now in the emergence of AI, but I've got a podcast called The Inner Edge. I write articles that go out on Substack, on LinkedIn. I do different posts on social media quite frequently, probably daily, I think at this point. Most of that is probably, I know, not going to generate any business. But the reason I'm doing it is because it's hitting my purpose, which also affects the brand, which over time, the intention is that it will hit the right people that will probably maybe want to talk to me. But a lot of it I know isn't going to. So,
Well, can I just jump in there for a
sure.
second? It might not immediately, but the fact is, if somebody's considering the seriousness of the role or the engagement of bringing you on board for somebody who's a significant decision maker or at the front line of leading an organization, it's not a decision made lightly to engage somebody with your kind of expertise and
True.
skills.
Yeah.
So somebody who's making, and particularly because you are bridging and challenging that individual at a personal and a professional level. So they're going to do their due diligence. And that means and so you want to be omnipresent in the relevant context, in the relevant space at which those leaders are going to go and do their due diligence. So I would never say it's wasted, but being consistently on message and advocating and representing your personal brand along with the business entity brand. And also then reflecting the fact that people consume content in different ways.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I would never say what you are doing is not necessarily, it's the combined impact of that. And also when people have consumed a bit of content over time, you're embedding.
Yeah. Yeah. No, actually, I would agree with what you're saying there. Yeah.
I think there's another aspect of this. So I work with a lot of people who are building their fractional offer. And a little bit like you, Shane, if you were just another executive coach out there, you just get a big yawn and a so what. In some ways, there's a similar challenge if you're yet another fractional FD or you're yet another fractional marketing person. And what I've found is really helpful to individuals is to get them to think about a hobby horse or a passion or a cause that they actually care about, which is not contradictory to their professional life, but is aligned to it in some shape or form.
Yeah.
So if I'm a finance director and I'm passionate, I was a passionate rower in my youth and I still row, then maybe, I'm telling this story all the time about getting the boat to run faster and the team and precision and all that stuff. And I talk about the rowing races I've been to because it's a real interest of mine.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there's a tech guy I'm working with, and he's got very, very interested in how AI can be used to enhance people's understanding of their personality profiles. So he's going on about that all the time. But what he'd love to do is to do more work building enterprise architectures for large organizations. But he's got a particular take.
Yeah.
Is that something that's really made a difference for you as you've built your own personal brand?
Yes. I mean, look, what you're talking about there, what's nice is when I'm not talking and I'm listening, you're reminding me of different things with clients and myself. So the personal side, absolutely. I've learned over the years that sharing personal stuff, personal interests, it does make a difference. It makes you more relatable. I'm thinking of myself, I'm thinking of some other clients who, for example, are either they're thinking about leaving their job or, to move out to maybe a more fractional thing, or maybe move into a different phase of life. Maybe they want to kind of think about being on boards and things like that as non-executives, things like that. And so I'm saying, well, start thinking about that transition now before you go. So just start to increase gently. And of course, most people, you guys probably know this too, but I think it's something like only 4% of people on LinkedIn actually give content. So 96% of people are just watching, reading. And yet most of them, I think, would have something to contribute. But they overthink it. It's part of the inner game as well, as say, listen, there's always this fear of, well, I'm going to be judged. It's going to be, no, it's not good enough. It's going to look stupid. It's against, whatever. But actually, to your point, if you're writing about something that's of interest to you and you share something that's of interest to you and maybe why it's of interest, it will get attention. But actually, here's the thing, 96% of people probably won't tell you that.
Yeah.
Yet it still has been noted. And I think that's probably what's encouraged me to kind of stay with LinkedIn, because you realize, to Lorraine's point, and it's true, I think, is that, look, nothing really is wasted. There's multiple points of contact. People are watching. But that's why it's all the more important to go, is this consistent with your brand? And now what's interesting to me is that as well, as I said, I've got a small team around me now. I brought out a book 18 months ago called The Inner CEO. That was also part of my thought leadership, I suppose, direction and some repositioning as well, The Inner CEO. And it's about how to become the boss of your mind and thrive. But during that time, when we're doing the launch, I created a small team around me to help with the social media and the marketing. Post-launch, I was wondering, do I keep it going or not? I said, no, I'm going to keep it going because I can see the benefit to the business, and we've kept it going. But what's been interesting is that I've had to make sure that I imprint the brand tone into the team.
Yeah.
And that's been a very interesting experiment, because you realize, oh, I am clear on what my tone is, because when you see what it's not, it's easy to go, no, that's not what it is. So sometimes I might be able to tell them what it is until I see what it's not. And they go, oh, no, it's not that, it's this. So for example, I'll be clear that, we're trying to add some value. We don't oversell. Every now and again, there should be some self-deprecating humor in there. That's part of what my brand tone is about, not taking itself too seriously, adding value, asking questions, and also then challenging the status quo.
And you've perfectly described what I would describe as mapping out that brand persona and developing signature language and key messaging and having it documented. So when you have a team working around you, whether they're remote or full-time in-house, there's a really strong frame of reference. So you have a consistency, whether it's a 30-second short clip video where you're just sharing a key nugget, or whether it's a 2,000-word piece of thought leadership, you have a consistency in the tone of everything that you're sharing. And it makes it much easier for everybody else to stay on brand when they're representing the business per se, or representing you as the leader within that context.
Yeah, and I'd just like to invite the listeners to do a short experiment. If you go onto LinkedIn and look at /Shane Cradock 1D, what you'll see there is quite an interesting picture for a professional. I don't know whether you're screaming into the void or whatever it is, Shane, but a bit different from some of the suited and booted pictures we see. But then if you go to shanecradock.com, again, 1D in Cradock, you'll see actually the imagery of you is quite diverse. Now, we've got you in a suit, we've got you as though you're about to go off to the gym. Just that way that you present yourself is quite interesting to see purely visually in the way that you've gone about it. And so am I somebody that I'd invite to do a keynote speak at somebody's wedding? Brush up all right, you know. Are you somebody I'd like to have alongside me, roaring a crowd on in the rugby? Looks like you'd be great at doing that. You know, it just, and I'm slightly speculating, and I don't know you well enough to be rude about you, but it's just interesting to
You can be rude. It's
how
okay. I
those
don't
things
mind.
come across.
You can be rude. Rude to be fun. I'd say rude to be fun. Just a couple of stories there. One is that picture. Well, it's my face. You say it's roaring or screaming, or maybe it's a blend of both. But I was getting some of my professional photos done a couple of years ago with a guy called John Murray in Dublin, and John's very good. And then we were just having a break, and he just said, "Hey, let's just mess around and let's do stupid faces." And he said, "Come on, do a screaming face." So I did that one. That was the first one, and thought nothing more of it. He thought, "Oh, that's great," and I said, "Yeah, yeah, whatever." And then afterwards, he gave me back the professional shots, some of which you see on the website there that you're pointing out to, Charles. And then he gave me this other scream face. And I was like, "Oh, that's a bit weird looking." And then when I came home and I showed it to my wife, she was like, "Oh, that's great. That's my favorite." And I was like, "Seriously?" She goes, "Oh yeah, totally." She said, "Especially like with your story, and it's a blend of angst and agony and warrior." And I was like, "Really?" And she goes, "Yeah, you should use that one." And I was
When I
like,
saw you change it to that, I thought it was a really good representation of your persona for all the reasons. Once you know your story, your core specialization, your purpose, and what you deliver on, it's actually really very much in alignment. And then, really importantly, from a brand point of view, is it's highly differentiated.
yeah, yeah. And actually, going
Absolutely.
back on a point that you said earlier on there, I think both of you said in different ways that like that differentiation that you pointed out, Lorraine, I suppose that's something I'm always looking at because, in a world where every second person you meet is a coach, or increasingly there's a lot more to your point about there's a lot more fractional executives. So at one point, somebody said, "I'm a fractional CFO," and think, "Oh, that's interesting. What's that?" And all of a sudden, boom. And then all of a sudden you meet, now there's 100 of them. Then you go, "Okay, well, how do I differentiate?" And the differentiation then comes through people's experience of your brand, of your personal brand. They say, "Oh, no, that's the guy that does this." So they might say, "Oh, that's the guy who screams," or whatever. And actually, it's funny, we were doing the next iteration of the website there last year, because I was looking at it thinking it doesn't feel like it represents the brand anymore. And I was looking at what are we going to change? And so I kind of gave it out to people who knew me, who gave me feedback, but they all kind of came back with the same thing, which was they said it's what I expect from somebody who does kind of what I think you do. And I thought, okay, well, then it's definitely wrong. So I said, we don't want them to be thinking this is what I expect. Because if you think about in my industry, you say, okay, well, coach, advisor, mentor, there's almost a kind of a standard template that person will have on a website. And so we thought, okay. And to be fair, Lorraine, to you, I'm going to give you credit here. There was something you said when you helped me out a few years ago when I was kind of making a kind of a key repositioning. And you said to me, the thing I kind of get out of your brand from talking to people around you is that like there is a sense of humor at times, right? And then you use this phrase, you said the splash of the unexpected. And that's which is kind of what I was doing. I just hadn't named it. So, I always like to do things with clients where I'll just do something they don't expect and say, "Hey, we're going to go to the theater." And they're thinking, What theater? What's that got to do with business? No, nothing. We're just going to go and enjoy a night out at the theater. So it's just something that's a little bit random, unexpected, and in the area of creativity a lot of the time. So that splash of creativity and the splash of the unexpected was kind of what we thought. This is what I've said to the team is every now and again, it's not all the time. It's just splash of the unexpected. It's in line with the brand. So it kind of keeps people on their toes and thinking he's kind of in this space, but he's not really the normal kind of guy in this space. That's kind of what I want them to be saying. And then once you've got the results then to back it up, then I suppose I'm in my mind, I'm making the assumption that the right type of client who's kind of in that kind of zone will lean in a little bit more. It won't be for everybody, and that's okay. But increasingly, I think even I can see myself making even more differentiation in the next even 12 months, specific things that I'm going to be changing because the brand has evolved, my business has evolved, there's changes that are coming, and I'm thinking all the time about, oh, okay, the articles need to start shifting now. The message needs to start shifting because there's a new direction coming in. And so it all comes out then, it ripples out from that core. So the differentiation thing to me, Lorraine, would be really important. And it's kind of a never ending game, really.
Because you've touched on some really key points here. And if we were to just give even some direction to say some of our listeners who are either experienced fractional executives and really looking to step up their game, or those who are moving newly into this context, if you are going to stand out in what is an incredibly busy and noisy marketplace, being safe and vanilla down the middle just isn't going to cut it any longer. You have got to stand for something, and it needs to cause a few ripples. It needs to challenge people and push back on the safe middle road, because being a powerful brand is all about having, as Charles mentioned earlier, that Marmite factor. And for those of you who are not familiar with Marmite, it's a spread on your toast.
It's disgusting. It's disgusting.
It's a real
Lovely, wonderful.
And some people love it and some people hate it. So a brand has got to have that kind of like, it's got to have that emotional kick where somebody just goes, yeah, I totally love that. Or it's like, not a hope in heck, but you need to have that resonance to either alienate or attract your ideal target audience, which means you've got to amp up that level of differentiation, but you've got to get to that point of clarity, which you've really worked on, Shane, to get through to that. Well, what is that? And sometimes that's really difficult for us to identify ourselves, to have that internal consciousness of it. So you do need to go out and sense check it, and to get feedback from the marketplace, but make sure it's from your relevant primary target audience.
And I suppose the other thing that I was wondering is, some of the professionals I work with, they've been involved in marketing roles, they've been involved in sales roles, they've been in product development roles, and so they understand how to engage with customers, but perhaps there is something different they need to think about when they're marketing themselves as individuals to CEOs and senior leaders. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on two aspects of that. As buyers, do they think about personal brands in a different way? And the second thing is, if I'm the product, how do I get over myself?
Yeah, well, I mean, like the how do I get over myself question comes to everybody actually. Because, as I learned to my detriment, every one of us has an inner voice, and that's something that I have a conversation with all my clients at the very start. And I go, have you got an inner voice? And hopefully they'll go, yeah. Occasionally they go, what are you talking about? And I'll say, well, look, you do have one. It's coming from your mind. And then I'll say something confusing, which is going to be something like, you're not your mind. You have one. And so I suppose my own experience, Charles, is that most people are playing well below their potential, even in areas like this, but I think in a lot of areas, because the inner voice stops them from sharing something quite interesting or creative, which is the loss of the world. Because, we're living in a time where there's an explosion in ways to share ideas. Unfortunately, I'm not too sure I rate most of the quality of ideas that I see, because a lot of them can be very generic. Whereas if something that's coming from the heart, and something that, even, as you said earlier on, it might be nothing to do with work, and say, hey, look, here's something I've learned in my hobby, then that's very, very powerful. And unfortunately, the inner voice for most people shuts them down. So when you say, how do I get over that? How do I get over myself? It's about recognizing that, look, that inner voice generally is based on fear. It'll stop you from stepping into the unknown. And I think that's why sometimes it's helpful to be around people who are doing it.
Yeah.
It's also helpful to have an advisor around you, perhaps, to push in that direction. There's multiple ways of doing it, so you don't have to do it on your own. I think there's different ways you can do it, or get around people who are trying to do the same thing. You can support each other. So I think that's an easy way to get over yourself. But most importantly, realize that everybody has an inner voice. You'd be shocked at the conversations that I've had over the years. It was very encouraging to me, actually, where I might meet somebody who's seen as extremely successful, and yet their inner voice is holding them back on certain things. Even this kind of area where we're talking about, I want you to step out over here because now's the time. You have the right story, you've got the credentials, and you want to make an impact. Let's go.
But to come back to the buyer, the
yes,
CEO and senior leaders who are going to be buying our fractional executives, do they perceive these brands in a different way? Do they have different values about how they engage with these personalities, if you like?
There might be a couple of ways to look at that, if you're talking about the buyer, from my perspective anyway. But look, I think it goes back to the core of what we said earlier on, which is, look, ultimately, forget about being on the internet or LinkedIn or whatever. You have a personal brand. So when you walk in the room with potential client or an existing client or CEO, whatever, um, you're giving a message in how you act, in your composure or not, in how you dress, etc., and what you stand for. And then if people are connecting with you online, um, like to Lorraine's point, like I do think people like check you out. They do look at what you're doing, and maybe that's why people are afraid to share something about themselves, because they don't want people to kind of look. But I think it's better to have something there that's of interest and genuine, and not trying to overly sell or do something that's fake. That's why, go back to your point originally, Charles, around if they can share something, um, even if it's just like once a month on LinkedIn, you're now gone into the 4% that share something. And even if it's like, hey, here's something that I learned from my rugby team or my committee or going to the gym or blah, 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 blah. Or here's an article that I found of interest and here's why it's interesting to me. That's something that I think adds value to your perception and your perceived value if you're dealing with a potential buyer that will help you stand out, which links back to the differentiation point. It's just a little point of personality or something that's human to say, oh, I like that, as opposed to just being nothing.
Well, it also comes back to what sometimes my experience of working with decision makers and leaders, and a lot of what you were describing here, Shane, will for some people be very uncomfortable. And particularly for stepping out into the broader light. And I bring it back to, well, what is that bigger purpose of what you want to achieve and do and give, and the impact you want to have, whether that's at a personal level or a business level or both. And when you have that kind of laser focus, that North Star, the intimidation of stepping out becomes less of an issue, because we're all born with innate talents. And as you've already articulated, many of us don't actually step out and live to our full potential. But when you have clarity around what that North Star is, those kind of nervousness about stepping out or discomfort, well, you grow beyond those boundaries, but it becomes less important.
Agreed.
I do also think there's some do's and don'ts depending on the platform you're on.
Mm-hmm.
So, if I think about LinkedIn as a professional platform, I am extremely cautious about offering a political opinion.
Yeah.
I might draw something from the news and talk about it from a leadership point of view or from an ageism point of view, because that's my big thing. But I won't start taking a political position, because I think that's unhelpful. And then there are other, culture wars type positions that, again, I'm not sure LinkedIn is the right place to do that. If I wanted to do that, then maybe I need to go to Trump Social or whatever it's called, or X, and then I can rant as much as I like. But I don't think that's the right thing for the brand building we're trying to build in a professional setting.
Yeah, you're dead right.
I'd also challenge that a little bit, Charles, and say, well, if there's aspects of what you are really believe in, and that is relevant to the core target audience you want to engage with, and you uniquely want to and specifically want to engage with that target audience, well, that can be an integral part of your brand, but only if it's hugely relevant to that target audience that you want to engage with. If not, then absolutely be more judicious about how you engage about, because those issues can fire people up inappropriately. But it comes
just
back
play
to
with that for a moment, because and I'd be interested in just opening this up a little bit. From my point of view, I feel that we throw away a lot of talent because of their age or because they're military veterans.
Mm-hmm.
So I could jump up and down on my platform and say, how evil and bad the military is because they let their veterans go without looking after them.
Yeah.
I could criticize the government because they don't properly invest in PTSD, and I could criticize the government because their policies actually are age discriminatory across the whole gamut. Our tax system is age discriminatory in the UK. Now, all of those things would be valid things to say, but if I then turn it into a diatribe about we pay too much taxes, or the elderly get too many benefits, or the young people aren't working hard enough, I'm not sure that's helpful, because I don't think that brings insight into the debate. I think that's just a rant.
I would totally agree with you on that. And the reason why I've challenged you on it is because in the last week, I've read 3 articles that have come into me differently, which have made me sit back and go, that's really interesting. That's unexpected. But the individual who wrote those articles is an extremely successful entrepreneur bridging between the US and Scandinavia, brought a depth of insight to those opinions and an analysis around the rationale of why he had come to that view. And consequently, it was really interesting because I knew and know the really successful business he's built and the different elements and aspects of some of his personal life in terms of, because he shares that publicly. I don't know him at a really detailed level, but it's just an observation. I've been a beneficiary or user of some of those products from a tech point of view. But this was very interesting because he shared a depth of insight as somebody who's a European straddling across 2 different jurisdictions with an analysis from, say, let's the tectonic plate shift in the US versus the European one. And he brought a level of analysis that was covering economic, spiritual, political, across a broad spectrum. And that made me stop and look differently because of the insights of the rationale around that, because it challenged some of the thinking.
And I'd be interested in, Shane, in what you think about what's classically called the dinner party test. You can have any kind of conversation at the dinner party as long as you don't talk about sex, politics, and money. What's your advice to brand builders?
Well, as regards to dinner, it sounds like a boring dinner if I can't talk about that stuff. But no, look, I think, with regards to what you're talking about, I think if I reflect back perhaps on your listener, and maybe a listener who hasn't really done much here, right? For example, I think for me, the key question is, it's a combination of what you're both saying to me is, okay, first of all, who's my target audience? Like, so if I'm talking as a buyer to potential CEOs, okay, well, what are the things that they're interested in? So I think that is a relevant question. It's not that I'm kind of saying, I'm just going to put something up online because, this is what I see in the world, etc. So I think we have to be strategic about it. And I think it's like, okay, if I'm not known, like to the point that Lorraine mentioned about that person, obviously credibility, they're well known, maybe they've got an established brand, maybe it doesn't matter too much what they say because I don't really care. That's fine. That's different probably to most people. Most people do care. So I think, if I'm thinking, okay, for me even, it's something I think about all the time because it does shift, is like, who am I trying to talk to? Who am I trying to get attention? And I will share something. So even to me, if it's as simple as saying, okay, once a month for the rest of the year, I'm gonna write a short post, maybe with a link to an article that I found interesting. I'm going to say, here's why I think it's interesting, but I'm specifically thinking about my target audience that I think they're going to find it interesting. So I do that once a month. That to me is a healthy start. With a nice short, little 3 or 4 lines from me, and maybe over the course, I might share every second month, maybe something that's a little bit more personal. Go back to your point earlier on, Charles, around, actually, here's me at the rugby match, It reminded me of the psychology in a match, or turning a hard situation around, something that just links to maybe most CEOs, for example, or buyers like that would be competitive, or they're ambitious. They might be into sport, men and women. So I think it comes back to that in terms of who's my target audience. And honestly, I'm just reflecting as I'm listening to you guys that, I struggle with this sometimes. It's a kind of an ongoing thing. It's like, okay, hang on, have we got too vanilla here? Am I talking to? We're talking to too much of the market. We need to get more narrow. Like, who is the target audience? And like, it's something that I look at all the time because I'm thinking, yeah, that's kind of it's too broad. We need to narrow it down. Who is the specific person, looking at their demographic, looking at their psychographic, what's their age, like getting like the clearer you get on that and just talk to that person
Yeah.
for a little bit. And you gradually start to see people will start to view and they'll start to maybe slightly engage. But I think you have to make the assumption that the most important, I think, is to start be more strategic about it, asking the questions that have come up even in this podcast. What do I stand for? What are my goals? Who am I trying to talk to? And just with that, say, right, let's create a little 3 or 4 point plan that's every month, every 2 months, and just start going and not expect the world to light up. Because for most people, it doesn't. Like, I'm always shocked. We're talking about LinkedIn, but it could be any platform. I'm always shocked. I think I'll write great post here. This is going to knock it out of the park. Wow, watch this thing go viral. And then it's just tumbleweed. But then someone down the line, maybe a year later, somebody say, "Oh, you wrote a post about this, that, and the other. I never forgot it." And you're thinking, "Oh, so it wasn't wasted."
Yeah.
Just in terms of target audience, a little insight. A friend of mine said, "Charles, I'm going to put you on a TikTok channel." So I've got a TikTok channel, and what was interesting is TikTok gives you very good feedback about age demographics for free.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I was doing my thing, and surprise, surprise, the vast majority of the people that TikTok sends me to are 45 plus, which is my target demographic. Men and women about 50-50, which is great. So if you just want to test where your content is resonating, you might find it surprising that TikTok will give you a very quick readout. Whether it does anything else for you or not, I don't know, but it gives you a very quick readout.
Yeah, that's the bit I'm trying to explore with that as well. Because like the guy who helps me out with social media, he's got me on TikTok too. But I'm not on it. I don't want to be on it. But all the metrics seem to be they are quite interesting, and the information it gives you, you're correct. I think look that isn't the situation though right now is that it can be overwhelming where to start. So I think the thing is pick one
Pick one and do it
just
well
do something. Yeah.
instead of trying to spread yourself too thin.
Yeah, yeah. And I suppose I'm talking to you mostly about LinkedIn because that's probably the one that's my dominant one at the moment.
Yeah.
But we're always testing on the others, but for me that's that. But let's not forget the real world too. Like there's speaking, there's PR, there's showing up and going to events.
Yeah.
So all of that comes into it too in terms of, even like you're going to an interesting conference. Okay, share something about it that your target audience, like what would they find interesting? Great way to kind of share content. So I think you can do this ad hoc, but I think ultimately, like for me, even as we're talking, which I find it very stimulating, reflecting even on some of this myself, because it is an intangible a lot of the time. But yet, from my perspective, I think somebody is missing a trick if they don't put it in as a strategic part of their career.
Yeah.
It's too important because that's the world we're in now. And the differentiation, if done strategically, adds one thing that's hugely powerful in any career or company, which is perceived value.
Yeah.
And so like perceived value is incredible. And that can be structured, that can be enhanced. I'm always looking at it. I'm always looking at ways to try and enhance my perceived value with a client or a potential client. And that can be done through storytelling as well. So I suppose, for me, and again, I really mean what I'm saying is that I don't think about it in this way as like you guys are asking me questions. We're kind of breaking it down and reflecting back because I'm in it and I'm doing it. Sometimes you don't think about it in the same way. It's not as conscious, but I just realized as I'm talking to you how much value I place on it.
And Shane, you have shared really valuable insights and that I think are going to be as much use to both fractional executives as buyers, because there's probably an awful lot of what you've shared that they actually haven't given conscious thought to. And you're living evidence of it works. So thank you for being so generous with that. So could you share with our listeners where they could find or learn more about you and your work?
Well, if they want to see the screaming face, as Charles mentioned, they can go to they can go to LinkedIn, and it's the handle is Shane Cradock with one D, Cradock. My website is shanecradock.com, one D as well. And then look, I have a book called The Inner CEO. They can check out my content. There's a lot in that, and then also I've got a podcast called The Inner Edge by or with Shane Cradock.
That's great. So thank you so much, Shane. Don't forget to follow the Fractional Frontier for more episodes like this. And if you found today's conversation valuable, then share it with your network. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn for more exclusive content and catch the edited episodes on all major platforms. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you enjoyed today's discussion, leave us a review or share the episode with your network. Take some of Shane's advice. Push it out there with your own comment. Thanks for exploring the fractional frontier with us, where leadership knows no boundaries.